Well, welcome back to the Faith versus Fear podcast. And we've come a long way in this journey. We've talked about fear and we've defined faith and we've explored the battle between them. And we've taken steps towards overcoming fear through faith. But today we take it one more step forward because faith, when lived out, becomes something very powerful. It becomes courage. And here's a truth that we're learning and leaning into today, that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in faith anyway. So when you hear the word courage, what comes to mind? Maybe it's about boldness, confidence and fearlessness. But real courage doesn't look like that. Real courage often looks quiet. It looks like showing up when you feel insecure, speaking out when your voice shakes, and taking the time when you'd rather stay still. See, courage is not about having no fear. It's about deciding that fear doesn't get to stop me. So let's talk about courage in real life, because courage isn't just a concept. It's something that people live out every day. There's historical courage. So think about people throughout history who have stepped into the unknown. They didn't have guarantees and they didn't have certainty, but they moved forward anyway because they believed in something greater than their fear. Their courage didn't come from comfort, it came from conviction. And then there's everyday courage. Now bring it a bit closer to home. Courage doesn't always make headlines. Sometimes it looks like leaving a situation that no longer aligns with who you are. It means starting over when it would be easier to stay stuck. And being honest when it would have been easier to stay silent. Choosing growth over comfort. These are just moments that might not seem dramatic, but they require something very powerful. They require faith in action. So let's talk about discomfort, because courage and discomfort go hand in hand. And if someone feels comfortable, it usually means it's familiar. And while comfort can feel safe, growth rarely happens there. Because growth happens when you try something new. You step outside of what's predictable when you face uncertainty. And yes, that often feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's often a sign that something is changing, that you're stretching, that you're growing, and that courage often involves risk. Not reckless risk, but faith-driven risk. The kind where you don't have to have all the answers. You don't feel fully ready, and you don't know exactly how it will turn out. But you move forward anyway, because staying where you are feels more limiting than stepping forward. So faith-driven risk says, I don't need guarantees to begin. And that is what's so powerful, because so many people wait. They wait for the perfect time, the complete confidence, and the full clarity. But those things rarely come before action. They often come after you begin. And there's a powerful reminder in Scripture about this. It says, be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Joshua 1:9. Notice this doesn't say be strong because you feel ready, or be courageous because nothing is uncertain. It says be strong and courageous despite fear, because you are not alone. And that's where faith and courage connect. Faith reminds you that you're supported. Courage is the action that follows. So courage often comes down to a single moment, a decision point where you can either stay where it's safe or step into something uncertain. And in that moment, fear will speak, but so will faith. And your choice determines what happens next. Not forever, just in that moment. Because courage is built in moments, one decision at a time. So let's make this personal. Courage might look different in your life. It might be starting something that you've been putting off, or having a difficult but necessary conversation. It might mean letting go of something familiar but limiting, or believing in yourself again after doubt. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be real. Because courage isn't about impressing others. It's about aligning your actions with your faith. And courage isn't something that you either have or you don't have. It's something that you build. Every time you take a step despite fear, you choose growth over comfort, and you act on what you believe. You strengthen it. And over time, what once felt impossible starts to feel possible. Not because fear disappeared, but because your faith got stronger. So let's pause, take a breath, and let's reflect on this. Where is courage required in your life right now? Not someday, not later, but right now. What situation, what decision, and what step is asking you to be courageous? And just notice it, because awareness is the beginning of action. And courage doesn't mean that you won't feel afraid. It means that fear won't stop you. Because when faith leads, courage follows. And tomorrow we're going to wrap up all this journey with living a faith-filled life and what it looks like to sustain this beyond the moment. So until then, take one courageous step, even if it's small, and especially if it matters.